Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about this. I'm passionate about AMP for email. Real quick, show of hands, how many people have any idea what AMP for email is? Anybody not have any idea what AMP for email is? Cool, I can skip the part where I tell you what it is. So why don't I introduce the panelists. First up, we have Seth Wexfield from Pinterest. He's the product lead for growth channels. Next up, we have Chrissy Thornton, LendingTree email developer. And we have Heather Goff from Oracle Marketing Cloud, where she's the senior deliverability strategist. And last but not least, Megan Moore from Snag. She's marketing manager for email and MarTech. And don't sit on your microphones when you sit down. That was the advice they give us. So AMP is new but not new. It's been around for 2 years. Seth is a super early adopter. We really appreciate that. But it's still very much in the early days. So I just want to ask the panel really quick, like, what were your thoughts when you first heard about this technology and what, the possibilities it would unlock?
I mean, I was incredibly excited when I think Isaac was actually the first person who mentioned it to me, and we started talking about all the possibilities. So we're in the hourly job space, and there's a lot of information that needs to be communicated in a very specialized way, in a way that Gmail is actually going to not clip, ideally. So we like to have that open pixel firing, guys. So AMP holds a lot of potential, especially with accordions and sliders, and it's exciting. It's very exciting. And in theory, talking to everybody at Snag about it was a really rousing conversation. Everybody had ideas about how we could use it.
So we were just like, whoa. Mostly just because we talk a lot about email being still the digital backbone of the economy, like email still, right? But we are undoubtedly ripe for innovation and interactivity, right? Email is still static mostly. We've got kinetic design, we've got movable ink and different vendors that help you try to make it interactive, but it just really isn't there yet, and we need this. We're hungry for this. We were just talking on the side about how excited we are for this. And so it's mind-blowing, and the idea of Google being the champion of this is kind of an interesting piece as well, because if you think about it, Google is hyper-personalized. I mean, really, right? And so you transfer that to email, and then you get it across multiple ISPs and mobile, and it really starts to make a pretty expensive investment with kinetic design free, except for the operational effort. So just super cool, super ready for it, and super excited to see what clients do with it.
Yeah, so I'm an email developer, and coming from that standpoint, I was just excited to have something new to play with. So working in the email space, kind of a lot of the innovation that has happened with email has been hacks that people have found by accident that allow us to do really cool things. So to have someone intentionally create something that allows us to do really cool things was really exciting, especially with AMP bind and state, where we get JavaScript-like functionality, or even with forms where we're playing around with, we can hit APIs and then pull data back into the email. So the possibilities are endless. It's almost overwhelming. It's like there's so much we can do. Where do we start? But just kind of having that new toy, that new thing to play with, is what really excited me about AMP.
Just echoing what everyone else says. Obviously, I was super excited about it. Pinterest is excited to be an early adopter of this technology, to be able to start playing with it, to see how it impacts consumers. But one of the earliest conversations we had was actually, how the F are we going to measure this thing? And that continues to be a fun challenge.
Well, that's an interesting point. So at Google, we are also senders of AMP for email. Anybody who uses Google Docs has probably seen the Docs comments emails where you can reply in line. And if you haven't, you will soon. We love it at Google. It's super exciting. We've increased the amount of replies to those comment threads by something like 4x by implementing AMP for email. But if we just measure across the sort of standard marketing engagement metrics, like how much did you engage with this email or not, it's negative to neutral to slightly positive. And so if I was a traditional email marketer looking at those leading metrics, leading indicators, I might have canceled the program. But we decided that that wasn't the key metric we wanted to measure these things on. We wanted to measure on the docs, comments, replies. So I think this is an interesting question for all of you. How do you plan to measure this? Like, how do you figure out what the right things are to measure?
I'm happy to start. So at Pinterest, we actually use the same A/B experimentation framework for emails as we use for our core product. And so we use all the same measurement. We look at how we're affecting long-term user behavior, how we're affecting retention and engagement in the product, in the session and after the session. And I think Mike from Brightwave earlier talked about conversion being one of the most interesting data points from the last 2 years. And I think it's just going to take everybody getting more and more to that, getting out of the surface level metrics and into how is this affecting retention. And that's some of the early data that we're seeing where there is kind of some meaningful changes in behavior based on AMP is with that long-term retention number. Though also some of the surface numbers can be changed.
Yeah, so right now, like, we're really only kind of looking at those surface level metrics. So we're looking at click-through rate. A lot of it, we're still doing a lot of problem solving. So it's like we're moving forward. We don't have a clear picture of where we want to go, and we're kind of figuring it out. So for example, we've done 2 AMP emails so far, and like our click-through rates have increased by like 86%. Like, it's ridiculous just how much that interactivity level happened. Like, I remember the first email we did, we just put a slider in, how much money do you want for a personal loan? And as you slid the slider, the number would change. It didn't do anything, but we just wanted to see if people would even be willing to engage with it, and they were. So the next step, we put a quiz in our email. So based on the answers you selected, we would link you out to a different financial product that we thought would be helpful. So those early indicators have made us like just really excited, and has kind of given us like, maybe business case is not quite the word, but just a good metric to kind of justify us going forward and doing more exploration. So analytics is a part that we're still trying to figure out, and we haven't solidified yet.
So as part of a strategic services organization, I get the good fortune to work with some incredible brands that push us really hard, and they invite us to the table of really thinking things through strategically. So they're saying, look, we've got to beat this number from last year. What are you going to do about that? And you're like, ooh. But the exciting piece of that is that we get to be there ahead of time, strategically helping advise them. And if we can understand a business case that we know their business is trying to solve, and then look at the use case we could use either with interactivity or live content within AMP for email, it could be very compelling when you hear stats like 86% lift, right? This is massive. And so I think one of the cool things that I heard Hillary say this morning is mediocrity looks similar to excellence. And I love that she said that, because I think, to Christy's point, early on, you don't exactly know how to measure it. But if you can be willing to be mediocre in your measurement at the beginning, and then know a business case and know your client well enough to know what they're trying to solve, and assign this new innovation to that use case, and then start testing it, and trying to be mediocre at measuring it at the first, but have that faith that the value exchange is there, and that's going to drive the business objectives you need to drive and hit that revenue with enough testing. So in theory, it's making a business case for having mediocre measurement early on, but basing on what Christy's saying, making the story all work.
And I do want to like inject, so like this number is really impressive, but our sends right now, so we're testing on desktop, about 2% of people were getting our AMP experience. So it's a small number, but as it grows and it moves to mobile, like we are really expecting to see like explosive growth and monetization off of this. So we're really excited about that.
I think sort of to Heather's point, when we're talking about setting expectations and being able to strategically advise around what kind of metrics we're trying to drive, what we need to be measuring, I've been facing that a lot internally. So we've been really focused at Snag on driving traffic and gaining market share and really moving the needle on a lot of those numbers, rather than some of the more downstream metrics that actually would, I think, really be more impacted long-term by hyper-personalized content or live content. So making that case, or attempting to make that case, internally has definitely been one of the big challenges that I have faced as we've tried to spin up all the back-end architecture that's needed to do this right.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting point. All of you had to convince somebody to make an investment in a brand new technology that isn't out in the wild, and at the beginning was only on Gmail on the web, and now is on Microsoft and Mail.ru, and Yahoo is coming soon, and mobile is also coming soon. Just a bunch of caveats there. So please, we've heard you. So how do you make that case for a not insignificant investment in an unproven technology?
Well, 86% is a really good, it's a really nice number. It sounds really nice. And I think what helps also is we have a very supportive team, and we're just interested in innovation, and kind of you just have to have this interest in playing around with it also. And I think the numbers kind of justify that curiosity and then that just willingness to kind of explore what's possible.
Some of our clients come to us and say, we just want to be cutting edge. Just do something cool. Like, we even have had some strategic requests with bad words in it. Like, we need to F some SH up, and we want you to tell us how to do it. We're like, that's a lot of bad words. But we're there. So anyway, honestly, those are the clients that I'm going to try to convince first, because they're inviting this, and they need to go to their leadership and say, look at this cool, shiny thing we're trying. That's my lowest hanging fruit, frankly. The ones that are more process-oriented, I just need to quantify the effort. And obviously, we need to make a decision as a very large customer experience application, sending billions of email, to look at this new protocol and make a decision on whether or not to support it. But also, once that's there, getting the client to ask for it. And interestingly, we're not getting a lot of requests yet. I don't think people are seeing it. They don't know about it. It's just nascent still. Things like this help, right? And hearing stories from you guys help. But I think we have to evangelize this and revolutionize it. Stripo did a great job yesterday saying, join the revolution. Like, please join in with us. And oh, by the way, we've packaged up this awesome tool. And I'm thinking, we need to talk. So, I think part of it is just the effort that we're doing right now to talk about it. And then make that business case, and then go to those early adopters that are really trying to shake things up and say, look, we've got something to try. Let's do it.
Yeah, I think one of the ways that, since I have a lot of skeptics on my side of the world, I think one of the ways that we've been working through sort of proving out the value of interactive email is putting elements within our existing kinetic emails that are actually, they look like AMP. They would behave like AMP. So having graphics that move, actually really putting GIFs into our emails. So you're not just thinking you're looking at a banner. That very easily segues into having a carousel for content. So you can take baby steps to really sort of prove out what the value actually is. And that's kind of the tack I've been taking internally. And so far, I think I'm converting some people, so I'm kind of excited.
That's fantastic. What about you, Seth? How'd you convince everybody?
Sure will. No, actually, very similar. So there's a very specific boundary we run into in our email sent to Gmail. We've found that the more pins we put in a pin recommendation email, the higher the engagement, which makes sense. There's a higher likelihood we're going to send you at least one thing you're interested in. But Gmail has a HTML limit for the email size, and so we can only include about 18 pins. We want to include more. There's this great argument that AMP lets us include more. We also want to include a hover animation. We did an experiment with a very basic CSS hover animation and saw about a 1% increase in click-through rate. So we know that's out there, that like if we could just include the hover animation and more pins, we know we're going to get more clicks. So kind of this tactical, like very specific constraint in the current environment helped to help push it through, as well as with just some, isn't this going to be really fun?
Has it been really fun?
Sure.
What was it like getting started, actually? Like, what was the effort like on your engineering teams and all that?
So we got started really early, and it was particularly painful because there was very little documentation. We were writing it in real time with the team. So there were a lot of snags. I'd say now we've got like other teams in the business starting to build AMP emails or AMP components, and it's much easier. Documentation's where it needs to be, and all in all, we take basically platform engineers, web engineers, people who know JavaScript and HTML. They don't really have too much of a problem. That's one of the nice things about AMP, whereas before, basically you could not have a normal web engineer build an email because they didn't know about how to make sure that they had the right margins for Outlook. AMP's really nice in that you can take a web engineer and they can build something.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
What was it like getting started? Like, what was the effort like of the actual technical effort?
Okay, yeah, so for us, it's kind of one of those things where it's like Nike, you decide you're going to do it, and you do it, and no matter what comes up, you just keep pushing forward. So, it was a process of getting whitelisted. We sent a couple of emails just to go through that process and then gain the approvals. For us, so our marketing platform initially did not support AMP, so we had Sparkpost on the back end who did our sends, so we found a really cool workaround just for being able to actually send the emails. Another thing is there's so much that you can do. It's kind of like it's hard to narrow it down and figure out like where exactly you want to start first. So just kind of starting small. And I think one of the really cool things about AMP is that there's a really great community of support around it. So there's not a lot of documentation. I took for granted just being able to type something in and get sent to Stack Overflow and have my answer. But like even in the Email Geeks Slack channel, so there's an AMP channel in there, and there's an actual like Google team member who I would constantly like hit him up. Hey, this isn't working. Can you take a look at this and maybe show me some ideas for how to fix this? So the level of support around it is phenomenal. Although like some of the web documentation, I think as we have more adopters, I think that will naturally grow. So that was the biggest hurdle for me, was just trying to piece things together, having 90% of it, but then just kind of getting that other 10% to get a final working product. So just kind of having a curious mind, being open to teamwork and collaboration. I've gotten to work with a ton of really intelligent, really smart people to kind of all put our heads together and come up with a final product. So it's just been like a great learning teamwork experience for me in doing AMP.
I haven't had the opportunity to get started yet, but frankly, listening to you guys, hats off to you for going for it, because you help us make a business case. So what I need to do is do exactly what you did. You said you get overwhelmed by how much you can do. So far, just hearing conversations of a colleague of mine that was at the Litmus event, hearing about AMP, and then with you all just getting to talk and prep for this event, I'm already deciding that live content has more business applications for more of my clients more quickly, and it will cover more of the market share of their distribution list, and I'll be able to make a business case more simply. So I won't focus on the interactivity yet, because that live content is something we've decided in listening to Indeed and whatnot, that is really the best play for the widest scope for the the bigger business case to make. So in listening to you and just gathering this information without even starting yet, I have to go make that business case, show them what we think they should try, break it down into little bite-sized pieces so we can do crawl, walk, run, and sort of hand-hold them through it. That's my job. Quantify the effort, make the business case, pick something simple and little to try and start and fixate their attention on it, and then we're off and running.
So interestingly, getting started has been a very slow process for Snag. Getting internal resources is one thing. So getting our engineering teams on board to spin up that back-end architecture that's needed has been its own thing. But interestingly, we don't actually have a dedicated email developer. So that leaves the product owner to build the emails. So I have been increasing my HTML fluency while I've been learning how to code with AMP. And it's a lot. It's a lot, especially for somebody who is not a developer by trade. But it is doable. And so if anything, I find that very encouraging for adoption down the line. Because if you just spend a little time with the community, with the documentation that is there, it actually is a feasible lift. It really is.
Cool. Yeah, so a couple of people mentioned the basic two use cases are live content versus some sort of interactivity or workflow baked in the email. I think everyone has a slightly different view on this, and so it'd be interesting to see which of those is more compelling to your users and why.
I think live content is probably going to be hands down the winner, just because, so in the hourly job space, you don't really want to send an email for a very large national brand and say, oh, these positions might be available near you. Because chances are, especially in the hourly space, the people you're talking to desperately need this one job, or this is their second job that they're trying to get so they can support their family. So almost having to toe the line with bait and switch is not a great feeling for us, and it's definitely not a great feeling for our seekers. So having the ability to, for employer A, say, all right, well, we know that this seeker is within 10 miles of your store in Minneapolis. Here are 3 of the job roles that are available in that store. And then have different roles populate for somebody in Orlando, Florida. That is going to be a huge, huge step change for us.
And in fairness, I just made a big statement about live content, but I can think of 3 of my clients where interactivity is better, right? I mean, I've got a cruise line that would just love all this beautiful carousels and the imagery of the cruises. I mean, it's just, I can't even get started drooling over it, right? So cool. So I don't know yet, in fairness. I'm going to pass that one on over.
So I'm going to cheat and say both. Can I do that?
You totally can.
Okay, so I'm going to cheat
It's a good
and say
answer.
both. And the reason I'm saying that is because I think for myself and for a lot of people on my team, we're interested in bringing as much of the experience into email as possible. So instead of using email as that landing point into website, how much of the website can we bring into email? And so I think that's where the live content comes in. And with interactivity, I think what that allows us to do is kind of better understand within email. So where are they clicking? What are they looking at? Like, what are their preferences? I think it's a really awesome opportunity to gather data within email and then also present relevant information. So like with forms, having the ability to have APIs on the back end where you can gather some information, hit a database, maybe hit an endpoint, retrieve that data and send it back. So I think those 2 things will really work together to create a really powerful and unique experience for us at LendingTree.
I think there's actually 2 classes of interactivity. There's one that's like shiny, cool UI functionality, like a slider. And then there's a class that is, slider's actually kind of this too, but there's a class that's pulling steps forward. So that whether it's a Gmail comment of now I don't need to click up to the doc, or for us, I'm really looking forward to having save in the email. From the email, I'm already in a pin grid. I already know what I want to save. What do I need to click on that, wait for a website to load, then have to go through the steps. So I think there's the kind of fireworks going off or carousels, and then there's the steps that can be shortened for consumers. And so I think for us, it's going to be probably first and foremost the focus on being able to remove steps, or this being able to put more content in the email, and then kind of live content, and then maybe some of the cool UI stuff.
Good answers. So what has surprised you the most as you've gone through this journey with AMP?
I mean, okay, I'll start. I guess for me, I really am surprised by just how powerful of a tool it is. So, you've got carousels and you've got sliders, but really with that whole bind and state, that for me, that really changes the game inside of email. And it really allows you to be very creative and very specific with the things you're doing in your email. Also for me, kind of just going back to that level of community around it, Google really, really wants you to use this, and they put people in place to actually help you accomplish the things that you want to do. So, when I was in the Slack channel and I'm constantly harassing Philip with questions about how to do things, it doesn't feel like it's a bother. I really do feel supported in this community, even though it's fairly new, it's still a little bit small, but the support is really, really there to kind of help you get off the ground and get things running. So.
It occurs to me, actually, I think the thing that's most surprising is not the technology itself, but some of the really visceral, dogmatic reactions. Whether it's on the web or people that work with me, some people are just like, no, emails are static. The content cannot be changed. How dare you do this? And I'm like, well, this content's already changing. Like Home Depot has content that changes every day. This is already a thing people are doing. They're just doing it in really hacked out HTML. This gives us a framework to do it really effectively. One of the guys I work with on our security team actually was somebody who was very much against this as an idea initially. And then once the Gmail comment emails were enabled, all of a sudden we were talking a couple months ago, and he's like, God, I love that comment functionality. I'm like, that's AMP. That's AMP in email. And he's like, no. I'm like, yeah, that's what we're talking about. That's what this is. He's like, oh, well, I love that. I feel like there's echoes of this personalization conversation from earlier that's like, oh, I don't want to share my data, but I want to have that. Like, I think it's kind of similar where it's like, I have this idea that email is a static kind of receipt, as we were talking about earlier. But then once you experience, you're like, oh, I love this dynamicness. So that's been kind of what's, I think, probably most shocking to me is just how many people feel really attached to their concept of what an email is.
I can 100% agree with that. So some of the pushback that I was receiving internally was very much along those lines. It was either, that's not what email is for, or it was, well, this is just moving too fast. This is too big, it's too fast. We've got to slow down. So that, I think that was very surprising to me, especially being from a company where we're used to pushing forward as quickly and as forcefully as we can. Sort of hearing pump the brakes was a new experience and was very surprising to me.
Have any of you seen any interesting AMP use cases, AMP for email use cases that particularly compelling for you, or something you want to try to figure out how to incorporate for the things you're doing? It's kind of early, so this is a tough question, but.
Well, I was talking with Isaac earlier, and he gave me a really good idea. So, like, I'm always on the lookout for ideas that I can steal and then try to do myself. But he mentioned, like, updating email preferences in the email, because most of the times the email preference page is really horrible, especially on mobile. And so just kind of bringing that experience into email, making it a little more intuitive, and that's like one less step that you have to do, is a really cool one that I definitely plan on looking into when we get back. So.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm really high on personally is profile completion. So being able to complete modules of your user profile from the inbox, because traditionally that's always been a really tough ask for us. The call to action of complete your profile doesn't exactly convert. Because that could be a 5-second process, or it could be a 20-minute process. So actually being able to say, hey, just fill out these 5 questions while you're here and not expect anything more would be very compelling.
Yeah, similar to that. Actually, some of the stuff that we're pretty excited about is in the B2B space, which is not something I talk about very often because the vast majority of the emails that we send go to consumers. But we have an advertising business, and they send a lot of email to people who have advertising accounts on Pinterest. And those sort of steps, whether it's completing a profile or, hey, we need you to claim your domain, which involves like creating a very simple custom tag and copying and pasting it and then verifying it. Like, how nice is it if that tag is in the email, you copy and paste it, and you click the verify button in the email instead of being like, okay, now go off and take multiple steps. So these, again, it's like the shortening of the steps, these subtle things that, that's not hugely revolutionary, but actually are really impactful for our business. I think it's pretty interesting, and that's one of those teams that's like starting to think about how does that fit in, and starting to play with it in a way that's like, I certainly didn't, it was not even a thing that I thought about a couple months ago, was that team would be thinking about the value, but it's pretty clearly there.
Yeah, you guys are sort of talking about pulling the first 2 or 3 steps from whatever workflow in whatever funnel you have into the email. It'll be really fascinating to see how that affects funnel conversion metrics. If the first step doesn't take you away, if you can do those first 3 steps right inside the email, does that affect that step meaningfully enough to drive your business? Hopefully the answer will be yes. All right, so we're close on time. So I'll ask the wrap-up question. What's one thing you want to share with the audience about AMP for email, something you want everybody to remember?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I guess the one takeaway is that I think it opens up a lot of possibilities. Like if you're a creative person, wherever your imagination goes, like I really do believe that, you know, if you reach out to the right people, you can get it done. And I think the community is really excited for examples. Like I think if people can start seeing more examples of what's going on, you're really going to see the adoption rate skyrocket. So I'm like signed up for everybody, and I'm constantly on the lookout for those, like, you know, that little lightning bolt. So I think it's really exciting to be an early adopter because, you know, you can really, like with it being an open source tool also, you can really contribute like your ideas and kind of shape how you want it to be. So I got to go to the Contributor Summit a couple of weeks ago. I was the only email person there, unfortunately. I was hoping to find other people to bounce ideas off of, but I got to sit down with the Gmail team and kind of explain some of the things we were doing, and they were taking notes. So this is a really exciting opportunity to play around with it and share your feedback and get what you want out of the tool, which I think is a really unique opportunity. So
one of the things that I think is most exciting about some of the stuff that Hillary was saying this morning is the diversity in the group that you're working with is the more diverse, the better the end result is. And then the theme yesterday a little bit with all the Sparkpost stuff is better together. And frankly, for adoption, we are better collaborating and listening and talking about the community. Like the only way I'm gonna be able to make this business case to any of my clients and my company is hearing from stories about you guys doing it. So we really are better together. So Sparkpost, nice tagline. And that's the best way for us to get this off the ground. And I love hearing about how excited you guys are. And it helps me take that excitement back to different factions in my sphere of influence. And like Stripo says, you know, join the revolution, right? Let's try this. Let's do it. So it's exciting. We're better together. Let's all do this.
I don't know how I'm supposed to follow either of those because you were both extremely insightful. I think the big takeaway for me is email has been not stagnant, but it has been the same for a very long time. And hearing people say things like, and I know you've all heard this, email is dead, you know, hearing that constantly and really trying to fight back and say, no, it's not dead. There's a lot that we can do here. This provides more fuel for that. This says, this is the next step. This is above and beyond just going, let's tackle SMS, guys. You know, there is something more we can do. And so actually having ammunition is giant, absolutely giant.
So we're at time. We'll cut it off there. But if you have any questions, you can find any of us after the sessions. Thank you all so much for attending. Appreciate it.